book. Give me just a moment.
Linda, were you going to do a little mechanical discussion before I do it? Okay, this is Margaret Harding. I'm the current treasurer of ANS. A little background into why we're having this call, and we truly appreciate all of your attendance because we're trying to basically move the society forward and correct some issues. The scholarship funding issue has been around as a talking point for probably at least 7 or 8 years. Most of you are aware there was back in, I think it was 2007, the board decided that we should be taking more of an endowment-style approach to how we manage scholarships. There was a money put in a pot to help the professional divisions fund scholarships as well as some of the national scholarship setup. Unfortunately, it was never really, we didn't get it clear. And about, when was it, Darby, the Reno meeting, I guess? So last winter, no, it must have been last summer, a year ago. It came to a, yeah, that's right, it was Reno a year ago. Kind of came to light that there was a huge misconception between the parties involved as to what exactly was going on with scholarship funding. There were comments made about professional divisions being on welfare. There were comments made about the board taking back its gift. There was a lot of anxiety on both sides. So as treasurer, and because it's money, it came to our committee, the finance committee, to try to figure out what to do. Darby failed to step back fast enough. Actually, she volunteered to help straighten this out and to figure out exactly how we go forward with scholarship funding and to clarify it for all the professional divisions and everyone who's interested. And this call is the first step toward making that happen. So without further ado, Darby, have at it.
Okay, so what we're going to do, since you're all muted, is I know that you're going to have questions as we go along. Go ahead and feel free to type those in the Q&A box. When we get to the end, Staci's going to help me go through them and we're going to address questions. But you need to know ahead of time we're only going to address questions that apply to all of the scholarships. If you have a specific question about your specific situation, we're going to work with you offline. And then feel free to use the chat for whatever you want to use the chat for. Art, I'm sorry that we didn't let you know ahead of time that the Q&A box was on the record. So the brief things that are going to happen in this process is first we have this presentation. This presentation is going to give you the background to understand how things work, where we came from, where we're going. And it's also going to give you the background to understand your scholarship statement. Your scholarship statement will be sent to you by the 20th, and it's going to contain a record of the last 3 years of transactions on your scholarship account. You're probably not going to understand the subtleties of the statement without this presentation, so that's why we're doing this. After you get your statement, you're going to have a couple of weeks where you can reconcile that statement with the records of your division, and you're going to have a chance to straighten out any mistakes. The idea is that we're going to get everybody on the same page, and then we're going to freeze the statements before the annual meeting so that going forward we're all on the same page. Then you will continue to get statements year by year that you can check and reconcile and get straightened out. There is one additional aspect. ANS has developed a thing we call the spend policy. That's going to have a small impact on scholarship, but the scholarship committee is going to have to do the final communication with you. We have a draft plan, but it's not completely final, so I'm not going to be talking about it in this presentation. Once it is final, there will be another communication that hopefully is very clear. So, a brief history. As Margaret mentioned, back in November 2006 to June 2007, the board of directors voted, and I have a bunch of quotes here because this is how it went down in the minutes, to fully endow all scholarships and awards by temporarily restricting extra funds and annually rebalancing. All three of those terms that I've put in quotes are mutually exclusive. If something is fully endowed, it is by definition not temporarily restricted. If it is able to be annually rebalanced, it is by definition neither fully endowed nor temporarily restricted. So you can see that this probably caused a little bit of confusion, especially for A&S staff who got tasked to figure out how to implement this. The Finance Committee was supposed to communicate what was implemented. The implementation was very challenged because they were given directions that were impossible to follow all of, and the communications failed spectacularly. So divisions had an unclear understanding of what had just happened with their scholarships. Then time went on. The economy tanked, which meant that we were, in some cases, drawing down on scholarship capital, and yet no one understood what was going on with the scholarships. So all of this has kind of been going on for 6 or 7 years. And then in 2013, we got the spend policy that I previously talked about. Very briefly, the spend policy tells A&S at a national level, if we have a multi-year recession, we need to not be spending so much money that we are draining our capital. So the spend policy says at a national level that A&S is supposed to take a 3-year rolling average of the return on our investments, take 90% of that 3-year rolling average, and never spend more than that 90%. This is going to be eventually flowed down to scholarships, but like I said, we're still finalizing the details of how that's going to happen. Just be aware that at some point in the future, there may be a limit above which you can't spend, and that limit is going to be based on this 3-year rolling average at 90%. So after 2007, this is how most of the divisions thought that everything worked. I'm going to walk through all of these boxes. We're going to use the same graphic all the way through the presentation. It's going to keep morphing. So what you see over here on the left is permanently restricted funds. And in the division mind, most of you that I talked to, you understood that there was money that was restricted for scholarships. It was permanently restricted for scholarships and would always be for scholarships. You see in the middle, there's a row for principal. All the way through, I'm going to be using the terms principal and capital interchangeably. I apologize for that. It's just how my brain works. Above the principal, you see earnings. Earnings from these restricted funds always went back into the restricted funds. And down at the bottom, you see adjustments to principal. So we have new gifts and endowments, which is money that came in from donors. You could also put money into the scholarship fund directly from a division operating contribution. And then the board action in 2007, everybody thought that that money went into that same fund. So in the division minds, most of you that I talked to, there was one fund for scholarships. And when it came time to pay the scholarship, a check was written that came out of the account that had the scholarship money. And if you wanted to, you can top it up with division operating funds. So this is a pretty simple concept, works really well. And as you can see, it's a little bit more complicated than that, because here's how finance thought it worked. Now, there's a difference here. We've gone from red boxes on the left to yellow boxes on the left. And that is the difference between a fully endowed scholarship and a normal scholarship fund. A fully endowed scholarship is money that was received by A&S with a contract attached. It's typically somebody who decided to set up a scholarship as part of their estate planning. They've passed away. The money arrives at A&S with a legal contract that says that this money will only ever be allowed to be used for scholarships and that the capital can't be drawn down. Only one scholarship and one award have those red boxes of full endowment or any endowment whatsoever. The scholarship is the William R. and Neela Kimball Award, and the award is the DuPont Nuclear Women's Achievement Award. You'll note that neither of those is a division-run scholarship. So there is no division, this is very important, there is no division that has an endowed scholarship. What all of you have is fully funded scholarships. This yellow column is still restricted money. This is money that came in when somebody wrote a check to A&S. It might have been someone wrote a $2,000 contribution when you were fundraising for your scholarship. This is money that comes in from outside A&S, but it is still dedicated for the purpose of scholarships. Now, legally, only the original dollars that arrived at A&S are restricted for the use of scholarships. So if I wrote a $100 check and all of my $100 went out in the scholarship that year, ANS's legal contract is fulfilled. They are not technically obligated to save that $100 and pay out only the interest. We have chosen voluntarily to do so. We have chosen to treat all of the leftover earnings on any of this capital as also temporarily restricted. So we voluntarily choose to treat that money as if it were an endowment, and that's what you're going to see for the rest of the presentation. So on this slide, we've got the yellow column, which is what I just described, checks that come in from outside ANS. We continue to feed the earnings on those back into the capital. Division operating fund contributions. Finance previously thought that if a division wrote a check, say they had a topical and they wanted to contribute $20,000, we thought that that money went into the temporarily restricted pocket. But we also thought that the board action in 2007 was separately tracked. So that's the green boxes on the right. What you have here is the board action, and we thought that the board was topping up yearly whatever was needed, but that money was there in perpetuity and just separately tracked. The catch is that neither divisions nor finance were correct on how it worked. And I seem to have just lost mouse control. There we go. This is how it actually works. And this is why nobody can explain the scholarships to you. So what we have here is 5 separate funds that were all being tracked. Moving from left to right, you have your red boxes, which we previously talked about. That's an endowment. You have your yellow boxes, which is money that came in from outside ANS. You have blue boxes, which is division-designated funds. So if your division had written a check off of that topical, that's the blue money, and it's separate from the yellow money. Then you have the money that the board gave in 2007, which is the dark green. And then for some reason, we were separately tracking all of the earnings on that board money, which is the light green boxes. There's some subtleties here that I need to go over. The first is, if you look at the earnings on principal line, the earnings on an endowment get routed back into temporarily restricted funds. So the earnings on an endowment do not grow the capital of the endowment. That's how the endowments work. That's desired, but that's why that box is colored differently and it's not red as you expect. It's also important to note that the board action, as we discussed earlier, is neither an endowment, red, nor temporarily restricted funds, yellow. And the reason for this is that when you do your national accounting, funds that were given from outside your organization, the endowments and the gifts that come from outside ANS, are classified separately from money that you use as your operating capital. So there's a red line on your screen that's between the yellow boxes and the blue boxes. This red line is a very important line when we get to our annual auditing of our statement. This red line is a line by law, and there is no way to pitch money over the wall from left to right. If money comes in from outside ANS with restrictions on how it's spent, it's on the left of the line. If ANS has general operating funds, it's on the right of the line. Now, what we do is we pretend that we have restricted money for certain purposes. The board and the divisions have the power to say these dollars are only going to be used for this thing. A good example of that is the division operating budget. The board has said that a division operating budget is restricted for the use of the division. That is, however, a pretend restriction. If ANS ever got into serious financial trouble and had to pay creditors, all of that money is actually up for grabs to be unrestricted and spent as we need to spend it. We cannot touch anything that's on the left side of the line. That came in from outside ANS, and it is restricted only for the purpose of scholarship. We can touch things on the right-hand side of the line. We just have to trust ourselves not to raid those accounts. So when the board designated money for scholarships, it is money that is technically unrestricted, So we don't use the word restricted when we talk about it. These are board-designated funds. Similarly, if a division decides to contribute money to its scholarship, it is division-designated funds. And again, I'm going to hammer this all the way through. You cannot directly move money from the left side of the line to the right side of the line. So let me see if there's anything else I need to cover before we, yes. The one other thing that you need to know about how it actually worked. You see how the arrow from the dark green board-designated funds is now two-way? This is because the board can take back that money. And in fact, the annual rebalancing was a two-way rebalance. The intent of that provision was that at the end of every year, the board would look at the balance you had in your temp restricted and division designated, and they would top up whatever you needed with board designated funds. But in a year where everything had made money, they could take money back. So what was happening was every year this was getting rebalanced to attempt to keep you at an even level. Only it didn't quite work like that, and we're going to cover why. Up here at the top, I've got the numbers for the order of scholarship funding. This was how ANS had to implement the policy. And again, they were attempting to implement a policy that was technically impossible to implement. So this is what happened. Scholarships were funded first out of temporarily restricted funds. If that wasn't enough, they were then funded with division-designated funds. And if that still wasn't enough, then the board money came in at the end and got you up to being able to send out your scholarship. And we're going to go over why it matters that that was the order. We've got a pretty simple example coming up. So this is a 5% return assumption. You've got a scholarship that has $20,000 of capital in its temp restricted, $20,000 in its division designated, and $20,000 in its board designated. So $60,000 total of capital. And we're going to earn 5% return. So each of these boxes is going to earn $1,000. We're assuming that the scholarship is $3,000, so we have exactly as much interest coming in as we need to fund the scholarship. But, you know, this is a scholarship by an industrious division, so the division down at the bottom has chosen to put $500 extra into this scholarship this year. So now we're going to see what happens when we pay them out in different orders. On the left here, we have left to right order, where money is being paid first out of temp restricted funds, then out of division, and then out of board. On the right, we have a right to left order, where money is being paid first out of the board, second out of division operating funds, which are topped up by the money the division gave, and then lastly out of the temp restricted funds. So now we're going to see what happens at the end of the year for these two cases. If you go left to right, the additional $500 that the division gave ends up on the right-hand side of the line, and it ends up in the division side, in the division capital. So that box is going to go up by $500. But if you fund from right to left, then the additional $500 that's left ends up on the left side of the line, which is the temp restricted. What we're essentially doing when we change the order of funding is we are choosing whether to pay out of the right-hand pocket or the left-hand pocket. If you pay out of the right-hand pocket, then you don't have to take as much out of the left-hand pocket. This is the only way in which we can, air quotes here, move money over that wall from the left side to the right side, is by choosing which pocket to pay out of. And once again, mouse control is a little slow. Okay, so the last thing that you need to know is that it actually got worse, because instead of paying the money directly out of the earnings on all of these buckets of principal, we were paying the money directly out of the principal. What this meant functionally from 2007 to 2014 was that a scholarship that had temporarily restricted funds always paid the full amount of the scholarship out of the temporarily restricted funds, because there's typically more than $3,000 in that bucket. The division-designated funds and the board-designated funds almost never got touched. And what this meant was that the interest was not always enough to backfill the amount that the scholarship had gone out. So we were draining the left side of the line while we were building up money on the right side of the line. And specifically, we were draining money out of the temporarily restricted principal while we were growing the board-designated earnings. This is absolutely backwards from how it should have functioned, and we needed to correct that as soon as we figured out what was happening. So this slide control is really bugging me. Okay. Our desired end state is something that is much more simple. Here we have the left side of the line and the right side of the line. Remembering for the moment that only one scholarship and one award have those red boxes, this gets extremely simple for division. You can just look at the yellows and the blues. You have a bucket on the left side of the line, you have a bucket on the right side of the line. Eventually, we would like for every scholarship to have these two buckets, and we would like for scholarships to be paid preferentially out of the right side of the line so that the left side of the line continues to build up. Now, there's one asterisk here, which is that scholarships such as Meade and the general scholarships, as well as any scholarships or awards that are not managed by the divisions, they don't have blue buckets, they have green buckets. We're going to substitute a green column for the blue for them. They will have a column on the left, which is their temporarily restricted funds, and then they will have a column on the right, which is board-designated funds that won't be taken away. In order to get to this desired end state, first, we had to make a whole bunch of changes, which we're about to go over. Second, our goal in getting there is to do it without ever taking money away from the division. We wanted the total of the principal boxes to always be constant or going up. We never wanted to put a scholarship in jeopardy. So, in November 2014, this is the plan that the Finance Committee rolled out. There are 4 changes. We're going to go over them in order. The first is we're going to roll the board-designated earnings into one board-designated allocation, so there's only one green fund to track. The second is we're going to pay the scholarships from earnings, not principal, so that we're not draining down capital. The third is we're going to change the order so that we are now going to pull from the board first and let stuff build up on the left-hand side of that line. And then the last thing that we're going to do is we're going to slowly reduce the board fund as the principal grows by market changes, but not by donor contribution. We're going to cover this a lot more heavily when we get to it, but that is a change that is intended to automatically, I don't want to say pay back the board, but pay back the board, but it happens automatically. It's not something that your division needs to worry about, and it should, ideally, if we've done our job right, be completely painless. So one at a time, we're going to roll the board-designated earnings into the board-designated capital, and we're going to stop tracking these two as a light green and a dark green. So you'll see going forward, there's only one green column. That was a pretty simple change for us to make that made things a lot more understandable. The second thing that we did is we said we're going to pay from earnings instead of from principal. So you see that these boxes are, again, up at the top of the screen instead of down by the bottom. Now, there's a subtlety here, which is that, especially with the new spend policy, there may be a year in which the interest earnings on these funds are not quite enough to cover your scholarship. The spend policy is going to allow you, in those cases, to spend a little bit more than the interest you earned if the couple of years before that year were good years. There also may be a year where we've just had 3 bad years in a row and your interest is totally not enough to cover your principal. On the slide here, I have illustrated it as if we are always capped by the amount of interest that we earned that year, but you do need to be aware that there are a couple of special years where you will be allowed to dip into your capital. When that happens, we'll be dipping into the capital evenly across the board, which is to say you'll be dipping in direct ratio to the amount of capital that's in each of your funds, so that you never have that situation where you're pulling all of your scholarship funding from one bucket. The third change that we made was we changed the order of funding. As we went over earlier, we're going to go from right to left now, which should allow things to build up on the left-hand side of the line. And then, sorry, I lost the page. Okay, the last change that we made, and this is the one that I want to spend a little bit of time talking about, is that we are going to each year reduce the amount of money in the board capital slowly as the money in the other buckets grows. Oh, I've just found my page. There is one thing that I missed on the last slide. This one funding source number 3, which is in parentheses, that is money that comes directly from division operating fund contributions. So in a year where past performance has been very poor and your spend limit or your interest earned does not allow you to give out your full scholarship, division always, always, always has the option of topping up the scholarship they're going to give that year directly out of their operating fund. If you choose to do this, we're still going to take the board money first. Then we're going to take money out of your division designated funds. And then we're going to top up whatever you choose to top up with your money out of your operating fund in order to protect earnings on your temporarily restricted, or alternately to allow you to give your full scholarship even in a year where performance was bad. So there's a big key here. We can only give you that line labeled number 3 if your treasurer sends a disbursement form to A&S National. We have no idea that you want to use your division operating funds for this purpose unless you send us the piece of paper that you use for every other check that you write out of your account. This is going to be really important going forward. If we don't have your disbursement form, we never know that you want to do this, and you end up draining stuff on the left if you don't put the form in. Okay, so moving forward a slide. Let's talk about how we reduce this board principal. We're going to have an example in just a minute. But the idea here is that as things on this principal line grow by investment growth, not by new gifts, not by new contributions from the division operating fund, but as they grow by investment interest building up, we're going to reduce the board allocated funds by the amount of surplus that you have every year. So that's a whole bunch of words there, net earnings on non-board principal. Look at the example for how this works. So in this example, this is our same scholarship we had before. They've got $20,000 of capital in each of the yellow, blue, and green buckets. But we're going to say this year we have 6% interest. So we're earning more interest than we need to give out our scholarship. So on the left, you can see that the total of the interest is $3,600. The scholarship is only $3,000, so we have $600 extra. By the order of funding, the $3,000 for the scholarship comes $1,200 out of the board earnings, $1,200 out of the division earnings, and then the remaining $600 is going to come out of the temp restricted earnings. What that means is that at the end of the year, if you look over on the right, the amount of capital that's in each of these buckets, we're now going to have $20,600 in the yellow box. We continue to have $20,000 in the blue box. And then for the green box, what we do is we say, all right, we had $600 extra. You made $600 net over what you had to spend. So we're going to take that $600 back out, and the board money goes down to $19,400. Now, if you look at the left side of the line, the total amount of capital that you had before you gave out your scholarship was $60,000 in all 3 of the principal boxes. If you look at the right side, you still have $60,000. So even though the board has taken back $600, the board has taken back $600 by giving you $600 more on the side of the line that nobody can touch. It can never be taken away. And you still have exactly the same amount of principal that you did before. This is the guiding principle for how we're implementing this, is that we're ideally never, ever, ever going to reduce the total amount of principal that you have in all of your boxes. The only way that that will happen is if the market drops, not because the board is taking money away from you. We always want you to have the same power to give out the scholarship that you did last year. So over time, as we continue to do this, we should ideally be approaching that desired end state that I showed before. By my calculations, if a division does absolutely nothing, it'll take about 20 years, and somewhere in the 20 to 25-year range, their green column will disappear completely because all of those funds will now be in either the yellow or the blue boxes. So over time, we'd like to get you back to as simple as possible. Remembering again with the asterisk that the general scholarships need, and things that don't have a division designated, they'll have a green column instead of the blue. There is a subtlety here that I want to highlight. There is an advantage to you for fundraising. I've said that you don't have to do anything. You can leave it on automatic and it'll fix itself. But if you fundraise, just like if you contribute to your retirement account, the earlier and more often that you fundraise, the better off you will be. Remember that when we take money out of the board account, we don't take out for anything that is a new gift. We only do it on investment earnings. So what that means is that the more that you fundraise, the more that you put money into your yellow and blue boxes, the more you're going to benefit from the compound interest on that contribution. And the faster you do it, the more you will benefit because you essentially get to build up that money while you still have green board money that is bearing the weight of your scholarship. So even though you do not have to pay back the board, it is definitely in your best interest to fundraise and try to get your scholarship fully funded out of yellow and blue money, because then you get the benefit of kind of having this free green money for a little bit longer. So going back to our overview that we had before, we've essentially finished the presentation for today. By April 20th, you're going to have a scholarship statement. As I said before, it's going to cover 2012 to 2014. It's important to know when you get these statements, for 2012 and 2013, you will be allowed to dispute your total balance. That's the total in all of those principal columns. You will not be able to dispute how much is on the left side of the line or the right side of the line. And the reason for this is that 2012 and 2013 have already been audited by our auditing firm. Those figures are set. We can't change them anymore. But if your total balance is wrong, we can make a correction to your total balance. If it turns out that there was a contribution to your scholarship that we just missed, that we allocated to the wrong place, we can fix that. And the way that we're going to fix it is by giving you more money on the right-hand side of the line in 2015 to make up for it. As we covered earlier, stuff will cascade over time from the right side of the line to the left side of the line, so it's not a crisis if your money is in the wrong place from the left or the right. If we make a correction for 2012 or 2013, we may or may not be able to get you back the interest on that. It's going to depend on a case-by-case basis of why the error happened. If, for example, the error was that the division failed to give a disbursement form and we didn't know the money was supposed to come out of your operating budget, that may not get you any interest back. If it's something like we received a check for the scholarship, but we credited it to general instead of your scholarship, we can probably get you that interest back. We're gonna attempt to be fair about it, but it's gonna be a case-by-case basis. On your statement for 2014, we have not finished the auditing for that yet. So you probably will have the opportunity to dispute whether stuff is on the left-hand side of the line or the right-hand side of the line for 2014. Again, the goal is to have all of the statements frozen by the annual meeting so that we are all on the same page going forward. And from that point forward, you will continue to receive regular statements that you can dispute everything on because it'll be a current year statement. And it'll be up to you to make sure that you are regularly reconciling those accounts with your own records. Sometime in here, we're going to finalize the spend guidance for the scholarship committee, and we'll be developing communications on that. It may end up being another webinar like this. It may be something that we can communicate with a 1- or 2-page PDF or something that we send you. So this is the same slide that we had before. I'm just going to leave it up to use it for questions. Before we get to the question part, I want to briefly recap your key takeaways from this presentation. The first is we have made some changes to the scholarship process that are intended to automatically, over time, make things more simple. You do not have to do anything for this to happen. However, it is in your best interest to continue to fundraise for your scholarship. You will receive a statement for your scholarship, and you will have the opportunity to dispute that and get it straightened out with your own records. And then 2 final reminders. First, stop saying fully endowed, say fully funded instead, because nobody has an endowed scholarship or award. And then second, if you want to contribute money from your division operating funds, you absolutely have to get a disbursement form to A&S Treasurer. With that, I think we're going to open it up to questions. And as I mentioned before, general questions only. So Staci, if you will help me moderate.
Yeah, we have a couple of general questions coming in. One was, will these slides be available later somewhere?
Yes. This entire presentation has been recorded, and we're going to send out the link for that, both for people who were on the call and also people who could not make the call.
And then the next couple of questions are kind of the same. How will the division know how much we need to top up prior to the time we get it approved in our budget?
So that is going to be covered when we communicate the spend policy. The plan is that you will know at the beginning of the year how much money you are allowed to spend by the spend policy. If that amount is less than the amount you want to give out on scholarships, you can do the math as to how much extra you need to put in for your division budget. But that'll be communicated around the time that your division is creating its budget for that year.
And then the next question essentially is the same. Is there going to be projection forecast available to divisions to enable them to predict future needs for contributing division operating funds? And I think that we discussed that with when the spend policy is finalized, we'll be able to predict those as well.
Yeah. Keeping in mind the spend policy for A&S National is a rolling 3-year average. So you can get a pretty good idea as to what your rolling 3-year average is going to be based on the 2 years that you have data for and the year that you're currently in.
And the next question, what happens on a bad year when none of the funds have interest income or they lose value?
This is, again, a spend policy question, but the short version is if it's an isolated bad year, for example, you had 2 good years and then a bad year, you will be able to benefit from the extra income that you earned in year 1 and year 2, and you'll still be able to give out your full scholarship. If it's been a couple of bad years in a row, you will be limited in the amount that you can give out. It'll, again, be somewhere around 90% of the 3-year rolling average. And in that year, your division would have a choice. You can either choose to top up the scholarship by directly contributing money from your operating fund, or you could choose not to give the scholarship that year. I will point out that in most cases, the scholarships that are being given out are the, 1,000, 1,500 level. We really don't expect there to be too many years where you have to top up with operating fund contributions. But there is always the potential for a multi-year recession like we saw starting in 2008.
And then the next question, what is the minimum capital needed to establish a fully funded scholarship?
The guidance that we are giving people right now is continue to use the 5% estimate. Fully funded is, depending on how you slice it, either going to change year to year if you're looking merely at the spend policy limit, or it's not going to change year to year. We think it's much simpler to just sort of use that 5% benchmark. I would say if your division has enough capital in your yellow and blue buckets that a 5% return would fund your scholarship, you can consider yourself fully funded. There might be 1 or 2 years out of 10 where you have to put in an additional couple $100s to make sure that your scholarship goes all the way out, but you are essentially fully funded. If you're at a point where 3 or 4% of the amount in your yellow and blue buckets would fund your scholarship, you'll pretty much never need to touch that again.
And the parameters today, I believe, are for a $2,000 scholarship, $40,000, for a $3,000 scholarship, $60,000, if you want to put hard numbers onto it.
Yeah, and that's the 5% estimate, which is still a good way to think about it.
Right. Those are all the questions in the queue right now.
But I've got 13 minutes left. I don't understand.
That's because you did such a good job of explaining it.
I also talk fast.
I will tell everyone this was an extremely complicated conversation. We very much want to ensure that you guys are kept whole, that we move the money into the yellow funds as much as possible to try to get, to prevent the board from saying 1 year, well, we're done with welfare and take the money away. So it will help you lock in your scholarships and have more predictable funding for your scholarships by moving as much as possible into the yellow box.
We just had another question pop up, and it's is it the best practice to have the full fund in the yellow box?
I would say that the best practice is actually probably to split your money yellow to blue. The difference is that yellow money can never, ever, 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 ever be taken away from your scholarship. There may be cases where you want to take money away from your scholarship. So, for example, let's forecast 10 years down the road, the economy's done spectacularly, and you now have way more money in your yellow box than you need to fund that scholarship. At that point, if all of your money is solely in the yellow box, your only option is going to be to increase the amount of that scholarship. If you have money in both the yellow and the blue boxes, remember the blue is division designated, so you, the division, can recharacterize that money at any time. If you have blue money that's extra, you can choose to create a second scholarship by rolling money from the one that's fully funded over to the one that you're just starting. You could choose to take that money back and have a really big pizza party for your division. You could do whatever you wanted with that blue money. The yellow money is safer because if A&S ever got in trouble, we can't take yellow money away from you. If A&S ever tried to go bankrupt, blue money could be taken away.
And the other point to make, the other analogy I like to use in this one is it's a question when you're thinking about your retirement, how much do you have in your restricted IRAs and how much do you keep in your general savings? And being in the IRA is great because it's interest deferred, but you can't touch it. Having it in your regular savings, yes, you have to pay interest, you have to pay taxes on the interest, but you have flexibility with how you use it. This is very similar thinking-wise.
Right, except that here you don't have to pay taxes on interest. So.
Right, but it's a flexibility question. So
yeah, it's a flexibility question.
Yeah. Okay, there's a couple more in here.
Yeah, a couple more. So board designated funds will never go up, correct?
You should never plan on them going up, but the board always has the opportunity to put more money into your bucket for you. And, you know, maybe there'll be a year in which they're feeling generous.
I think if there's a year where there's significant interest issues, the board may be willing to help out, but you shouldn't count on it.
There was a follow-up to the prior question. When you get to the point where it happens that the yellow bucket is fully funded, is it easy to change the disbursement rule to open up the blue money for other things?
You won't be changing the disbursement rules. You'll basically just be contacting the A&S treasurer or A&S staff to say, hey, we'd like to reassign some of the capital in the blue bucket to do something else. So in that case where you're starting up another scholarship, you would go through the normal process to start that scholarship up, and then you would contact the A&S treasurer and say, hey, we'd like to move some money out of scholarship blue box A to scholarship blue box B, and then you'd be good to go. Or you could alternately say, hey, we'd just like to pull some money out of scholarship blue box A and put it back in the division operating fund. And then a final question. You did a great job explaining it. If there's something confusing about the documents we receive on 420, who should we contact for a one-on-one? So the statements are, at the moment, we're planning to send out how to interpret your statement sheet along with your statement. If you are confused about how the statement should be read, you may contact me. You can also contact Staci or Margaret, but I may be the best for helping you interpret your statement. If you have a question about the specific transaction on your statement, like there's a line item that you don't know what it means, that would be Staci. If you have a question about, hey, there's a line item that says this, but we think it should say that, either Staci or Margaret can handle that.
We have a few minutes left. Are there any other questions from anybody else? I don't see anything coming in.
Cool. Thank you guys very much for your time and for sticking with us while we talk about all kinds of minutia with different colors of money.
John just asked that question.
Yes, another question. Any chance to get a statement of all money into the yellow side since the start of the scholarship?
I'm going to punt that question to you, Staci.
If specifically you're looking for something, we can work to try to do it. It depends how old the scholarship is. I have to tell you, I've been aboard only about 3 years, so I can tell you trying to go back and find records might be a little challenging, but we can definitely try, but I would like to do that on a one-off basis.
There's also a complication that we have changed our accounting software, and we've also changed how we treat some of this money at least 2 or 3 times for some of the longer-lived scholarships. So the longer your scholarship has been in existence, the more difficult it's going to be to get you what you're asking for. If you're asking for something that's been started up since 2007, I think you've got much better odds of being able to figure out what came in where.
And also remember that anything older than 2013, anything starting donated before the end of 2013 has been audited, and so even if you don't agree with what's there, we can't change it.
Yeah, we can correct it by making a change in 2015, but we can't change history.
Can't change history. No other questions?
All right, I think that's about it.
Thank you all for attending, and we will get you an email that has the link to this presentation so that you can go back and review all of the beautiful slides at your leisure.
Thank you.